Tropical storm watch in effect for Bret on tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for June 21st. Well, the main system active right now is still Tropical Storm Bret in the central Atlantic, and for those who are new to this, it is the summer solstice, but that means nothing much in terms of the tropical world. The tropics peak much later on in the year, around about the end of August, early September. The remnants of Biparjoy still active as well over north-central India, but first looking at the Atlantic here, and there's a big hole in the satellite image right now unfortunately, but an 80% system still behind Bret, and another area of interest that we've marked that will be emerging off Africa soon. So we've got Bret and two areas of interest right now in the Atlantic. Fascinating. In the Eastern Pacific, regrettably, you can't see very much of it. It's the imagery that we use as an outage here, but we'll be able to take a look at it in a little bit later on. But a 20% chance that we've got in the Eastern Pacific, and I'll point that out to you a little bit later on. In the Western Pacific, we've also got a 20% chance that we've designated as well for the Philippine Sea, a system that will eventually scroll up towards the northwest past the eastern islands of the Philippines. And in the Indian Ocean, we've still got the remnants of Biparjoy, which are still throwing up a little bit of convection to the southeast of New Delhi. Hasn't moved very much in the last 24 hours. As a matter of fact, I think if you round it to the nearest degree, it stayed the same since last night's update. So let's take a look around the world on satellite imagery and look out for any of these red spots showing significant amounts of rain rate. Quite a few from some waves over Africa there, and maybe one or two spots over India as well. Certainly the wet season down there and tropical waves could be churning out like a train there over the next few weeks. So here is some better satellite imagery then, the visible true colour as we enter the evening hours in the Eastern Pacific. Two areas there that look interesting, one on the left hand side which the GFS hasn't given up on, but at the moment we have, and the one further towards the right there, that's the one that we're giving that 20% chance could move north towards Mexico. Here's the Atlantic, the areas of interest mentioned, and Bret there, obviously you can see that one looking a little bit better this afternoon, evening, compared to what we were looking at this morning when it was struggling quite a bit more. Onto the water vapor imagery, it's got a big burst of convection there, but that system behind it, even though it's got a high chance, looking very desolate right now, just a little bit of convection blowing up, but I imagine it's got a decent beginnings of a rotation behind that. Looking at that imagery, the little bits of convection that are blowing up are rotating a little bit, even though they're quite away from the center. And on the far right of the image there, you'll just be able to make out that big blob there, another wave that's about to move off the coast of Africa. Feels like mid-season, doesn't it? But it is still very early on in this Atlantic hurricane season, even though Bret isn't performing quite to what we first expected. East Pacific looks like this, extremely warm waters off the coast of Mexico, just waiting for that first storm or two to develop. 32 degrees nearly off the coast of Mexico. The Atlantic also warming up very substantially near the Bahamas there, near the Antinos Island, around 31-32 degrees Celsius, also in along the coast of Cuba and the Florida Keys. Where those systems are right now in the MDR, looking okay as well. Bret will be getting into warmer waters, approaching 28-29 degrees Celsius soon, but wind shear will rise. Western Pacific also really extending out there, those really warm temperatures now, especially out in the open waters there, extending very far to the north, same latitude as Shanghai there for 26-27 degrees Celsius waters, and near the Philippines piping hot. North Indian Ocean also pretty much fully recovered now after the two cyclones that we had earlier on in the last few weeks. Of course, Mocha and Biparjoy temperatures have recovered. Southwest Indian Ocean, obviously there's no recovery here, we're into the winter time and temperatures are way down. Don't expect anything to happen here, or in the Australian region. You can never be too sure, but Australian region looks pretty chilly there as well, and the South Pacific with temperatures not up to standard in quite a few zones there. Compared to average though, South southern hemisphere is a little bit above average, but the western Pacific there is around about average. North Indian Ocean slightly above, but it's the Atlantic and the far eastern Pacific that really stand out for very warm sea surface temperatures. It's the MDR, the eastern part of the Atlantic Ocean there, that's getting really warm temperatures, at least 2 to 3 degrees above average, and in the eastern Pacific, 1 or 2 pockets of that as well off the coast of Mexico. Oceanic heat content is really warm, high now in the western part of the Caribbean, and it's having an influence elsewhere across the Atlantic, really expanding outwards now more than it is in those concentrated spots. Eastern Pacific still has a little way to go, but there's a few good spots there as well. Always comparing it to last year when it was really a dud, but it is quite a bit better than that right now. Western Pacific, really high values approaching the Philippine Islands and for a large area beyond. GFS for the next 5 days then. This is what becomes of Bret, probably forecasting 60 to 65 miles per hour now, moving through the Lesser Antilles and then into the Caribbean where it weakens substantially. Still traceable on day 5, it's approaching Honduras and Nicaragua, but it's extremely weak. It's pretty much generated to a tropical wave again, but there it is, crossing through probably Dominica or perhaps Martinique there as a tropical storm, 50 to 60 miles per hour. That next system behind it recurves a little bit as well, but that becomes a tropical storm too. Eastern Pacific, like I said, GFS hasn't given up on that system on the left hand side, it still develops it, but the one I'm more interested in is the one that forms right near the end of that 5-day period there. Much broader system, doesn't form completely by the end of day 5, but you can see it starting up there well to the south of Mexico, but it will get closer. But that first system maybe completely can't be discounted there, but it is only the GFS that's on board with that. And in the Western Pacific, looking out to that 5-day period again, look out for this system that forms to the west of Palau. There's the beginnings of it, I think, possibly. GFS struggles really. Oh no, there it is. It's doing all right towards the end of that 5-day period there, and possibly becoming a tropical cyclone by that time. So we could have systems in all basins before the end of this week, which for June is quite impressive. Usually we see quite a few storms in June, but they're generally small and weak. And this is the rainfall projection for Bret, and to be honest, this has been toned down a lot as well. Initially we were expecting perhaps 300 millimeters of rainfall, but the latest GFS forecast now is probably only going for maximums of 100 millimeters of rain. That's 4 inches. And that will be along some of those Lesser Antilles and Puerto Rico. There you can see those rainfall totals getting up around 3 inches, that's 75 millimeters. You can see that red zone out to sea, that's where the storm will be doing its worst, but it's quite far away from land. And over Puerto Rico there, maybe 3.5 inches. And on the southern islands there and Barbados, 1.5 inches there. That is around about 40 millimeters at maximum. So really showing that this storm is going to be running out of steam by the time it gets to the Eastern Caribbean. That's what we're thinking at any rate. And this is the longer range. Look out for possible multiple systems in the Eastern Pacific. There you can see a dual formation almost in sync there, and both of them reaching hurricane status according to the GFS there, and that second system behind it redeveloping actually. So 2 lives for that one. Forms in a very odd place off the coast of Costa Rica and then continues northwestwards, grazing by El Salvador and through the eastern provinces of Mexico and Guatemala, and then reforming again at the end. That would be a turn up for the books in itself. I shed some doubt over that at the moment. But the other system, much more likely. Western Pacific, that system eventually explodes into a significant tropical cyclone and then a typhoon as it starts to move northeastwards on that recurvature and could approach the Japanese Ryukyu Islands before we get to the end of 10 days. Still quite a way out, so I wouldn't put much influence on that decision yet, but keep watching that one and that might end up happening. That's all the serious stuff done with tonight. You can scan the barcode and take a look at the Force 13 merch store, where we have all of our usual items, including full season and individual storm animations on request. And are still waiting for a Hone t-shirt. When will it close down in the shop window? Possibly never, because we still don't see any sign of Hone. In the Scilly range, we're just going to keep watching that Western Pacific system. It scoots up northeastwards, passing quite close to the coast of Japan. Almost has vibes of maybe Gucciolo to a little extent there in its later stages, but a trend possibly occurring there, I should say, but northeastward movement there towards the end of that run, and nothing else becoming obvious there in the Western Pacific. Nothing else forms elsewhere in that time either. We just get decaying systems in the Eastern Pacific and that other third wave in the Atlantic. You can talk about all of this though on our Discord server, discord.gg/force13 for tropical weather chat and general weather chat, and all kinds of other chat on there as well if you want, with over 3,400 members. On this day, it was June 21st, 1985, when we had a very powerful and large typhoon scrape the northern coast of Luzon in the Philippines. Typhoon Hal, which was a Category 3, peaked at that intensity twice in its life, first of all before reaching the Philippines and again in the South China Sea. We also had Tropical Depression 4W, which remained unnamed, was actually on the weakening trend. It did become a tropical storm briefly as it moved through Hainan Island, but that of course weakened it, and by this point it had already done that and was into the Gulf of Tonkin as a depression. Back to today, and the next name in the Atlantic now is Cindy. In the Eastern Pacific, Adrian still hasn't arrived yet. It's going to become one of the latest starts to the Eastern Pacific hurricane season. And in the Central Pacific, we're still waiting for Hone after nearly 4 years. If we get past September, it will be the longest wait for a Central Pacific storm since the late 1970s. In the Western Pacific, the next name is Talin, and in the North Indian Ocean, it will be Tej. Time running out for the Southwest Indian Ocean to get one more storm to its name this season, so it looks like they'll be replaced. Gizani though is the next name for now. The Australian region, Jasper, and in the South Pacific, Lola. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.